So, like we have had a very sharp set of insights and sharp set of interactions that we've had over the last 2 days. But as you were sitting through these last 2 days, my question to you is, what do you think are the key takeaways? And what do you think India should need to do more? What is it that we can do more to really make India a more prosperous country? Dr. Chand, if you would like to go first. I know you have to leave at 5:25, so why don't you go first?
Thank you, Amit. My takeaways, first of all, during this 2 days dialogue, we got very diverse perspective. How Indian think about future of India, how Indian living in US think about future of India, how Western experts think about future of India, how skeptics see about future of India. And I feel the actual future may lies somewhere where you will get the confluence of these perspectives. Mm-hmm. That is the first takeaway I have. And I also feel that there was a lot of discussion on this growth versus equity. I'm agriculture economist, but I acknowledge that despite so much development in discipline of economics, still we have not been able to come out with a weighted index which combines both equity as well as growth. So as a result, it becomes subjective that which situation you feel is better, which situation is not. Like I would like to give this example. And this, I think, comparison India will face, whether we are emphasizing more on growth or we are emphasizing more on equity, unless we resolve that how we come with a combined index, which give weightage to both these. Like suppose there is a situation A, per capita income is $200, Gini coefficient is 0.6. From here, you go to situation V, per capita income increased to $400, Gini coefficient increased from 0.5 to 0.7. There is a situation C that you go from per capita income of $200 to $150, but Gini coefficient go down from 0.5 to 0.4. So, how do you conclude which situation is better? So I think this ultimately left to the judgment of political class, and my own. If somebody asks me which situation is better, I would say that you ask a poor person, he will accept higher income, even if there is higher inequality in the society. So this is again how we balance this growth versus equity that will remain there with India. I also find that as India grows, the choices are becoming more and more difficult. A large number of speakers emphasized what will happen to climate change, what will happen to greenhouse gas emission, what will happen to sustainability, and even social aspects. So, in my view, the goal of achieving 30 trillion may be much easier, but the goal of addressing climate change, the goal of addressing gender empowerment, the goal of addressing climate change as we go along, which will be much more challenging than achieving the goal of growth. The last point I want to make is what Gurcharanji mentioned, that Margaret Thatcher said that I spent 20% time on doing reform and 80% time on selling reforms. That is one area where I feel so far our government did not succeed. The government abandoned most of the reforms because it could not sell it. The first phase of NDA, they started with Land Acquisition Act. There was strong opposition in the parliament. As a result, the act was withdrawn. I think that is the major reason that unless you address the issue of land, it is very difficult to promote manufacturing. Finally, it was left to state, and we know what happens. Then we have this farmer agitation. Again, they were withdrawn. And we also know that on labor reforms, the central government again could not go much in terms of reform. Ultimately, it is left to the states. And this absence or lack of reform in labor market, to my mind, is the major reasons for much lower employment in manufacturing, and manufacturers preferring capital-intensive production rather than labor-intensive production, because they find it is very difficult to deal with labor in India. So like this, if you look at it, that we were able to do a few reforms like GST reform. It was a big reform, and there is huge return to it. But elsewhere, since those reforms were not done, any kind of transformational growth comes from reforms. It doesn't come from incremental kind of change. So I feel that if India had to meet its aspiration to become Viksit Bharat, India would need to muster courage to do reforms.
Very, very insightful. So like some ideas in terms of what needs to be done. But Mr. Kant, I would like to get you here. Like what Mr. Chand was saying is that the government has possibly not been able to market its reforms well, or not been able to tell the people well. Since you've been at the forefront of really creating such solutions, what do you think we should do to take it forward? And second point, what are your key takeaways from the conference, and what do you think we should discuss more in the years to come?
So let me start with the second question first. And I think when we do an India dialogue in Stanford, especially with the involvement of US Asia Technology Management Center, it's very important to realize that if India is to grow at high rates, and I think that's really the challenge, of growing at 9 to 10% for 3 decades, on a consistent basis for a long period of time, that is the challenge for India. And that cannot happen without innovation. That cannot happen without India getting into a range of sunrise areas of growth. India has to drive growth in range of emerging areas, whether it's battery storage, whether it's electric mobility, whether it's quantum computing, whether it's robotics, drones, whether it's green hydrogen, all these areas. They are all critical for India. And for India to grow, because value acceleration will come in all these areas. And I think the need to learn from the innovative culture of Stanford is very important. And it's also very important to see what kind of work is happening in the startup culture here and what's happening in the startup culture of India. And how do we see that more resources are able to go into the startup culture of India? And it was good that you had a number of VC. I found that to be a very exciting session on the VC funding and the challenges for India. Those are very, very important issues. Secondly, I'm a great believer that it will not be possible for India to grow at high rates without the private sector playing a far more critical and significant role in India, and government taking a retreat in several areas. And I think there is a need for this dialogue to have many more champions of private sector on how they've excelled in areas, new emerging areas of growth on manufacturing side. It's not just the services side, but the manufacturing side of what has happened. And in the afternoon, I went to a electric tractor company, which was very impressive, and the impact that it can have, where the battery can itself work like a substation. And those are kind of examples which should be brought out here of the cutting edge work happening in the valley, and what kind of implication it can have for India. And thirdly, my view is that there should be many more a lot of work that is happening in India in terms of huge amount of transformational work that has happened in India in a vast range of areas. We should get a couple of good researchers or academics who've done work in those cutting-edge areas of work to make presentation here so that we can also keep the Valley people fully informed of the kind of excellent work that has been done. And we should get some younger lot of people. There should be far more younger energy in this dialogue, both from Stanford as well as from India. Get a lot of young startup people here so that they can exchange ideas here. They are the ones who are going to make transformation. It's not old fogies like us who are going to make transformation. So get that young energy of both sides together here. And that'll be important for both India and for Silicon Valley to learn from each other. And to your first question about marketing for reforms, the Prime Minister is very clear. I mean, he's repeatedly saying that before we get into major transformation in India, we should be able to get all the stakeholders, convince them. We quite often think that this is the right approach, and we go ahead and do it without getting a buy-in from all the possible stakeholders. And I think that is critical in an emerging market economy. And it's important because, you know, today, if 80% of the growth is going to come from emerging markets, and in next 2 decades, emerging markets are going to contribute 2/3 of the growth, they have to do transformational work. And they will have to bring out radical reforms. And for radical reforms to happen in emerging markets, critical because many of these markets are going to move from socialist to private sector-led growth. For that to happen, you need a huge buy-in. It can't be done overnight because these countries have grown. We've grown. We went from a colonial Raj to a licensed Raj for 60, 70 years. For that to happen, you have to do a lot of disruption, but you need a buy-in of stakeholders. Otherwise, reforms will take a retreat. And therefore, it's incumbent upon all of us, whether we are civil servants, whether we are academicians, whether we are researchers, to be able to firstly believe in what you are doing, be absolutely convinced that what you are doing is the right thing, and then to be able to market that reform. And that's critical for each one of us, to do it with conviction and to do it with passion, and to bring all the stakeholders together.
Very nice. In fact, I think we have to accept your point that next year the old fogies should be in the audience more and the younger ones should be there. But Richard, I have to get you in here. Like what Amitabh ji said.
Actually, I was thinking I should wait and be the last one on this to comment, but
I still have a question, and it's no.
Certainly, I think that you're absolutely right. What I'm seeing, not so much about India, but about this community. Because the first time you do this, we had an event. That was last year. The second time we do this, I start to see the seeds of a community. And I see the core of a group that can have a lot more impact and a lot more weight. Who's going to bring the young people in, okay? This becomes all of our job. So I think that indeed, we have to approach this as kind of something where we see the importance of the relationship between India and the U.S. in order to improve the understanding of what's going on in India to other people in the United States, not just the people in this room, but also to really have the kind of impact that it takes the passion you're talking about to have. We have to do that. We have to be able to communicate it. I would very much like to see us move ahead with a little bit more on how India's place in the world is evolving. Because I think that is one aspect of our discussion that's kind of the logical next step from where we've come over the last couple of India dialogues. We really need to focus on that and how we can all play the most kind of productive and constructive role in that process.
Thank you. And Christian, you know, like You've been somebody who's been instrumental in terms of writing the competitiveness roadmap. You were listening to all the conversations. What do you think about the India growth story? You heard a lot of critics here as well. You heard some positive views. But as an academic, as somebody who's been looking at this whole economy from 35,000 feet, or as an outsider, what do you think we need to do more? And what are the key takeaways from the conference for you?
So I reflected on what is now changed compared to the day when I arrived here. And I've organized it in 3 buckets. I think one set of issues where I think my prior beliefs have been reinforced. One where I would say, I've learned something new. And one where I have more questions, and maybe something that we can build on. So what has been reinforced? I mean, I think that, not surprisingly, the belief in the strength of the Indian growth story. I think I've only seen more, not only the more detailed examples, but I think if you hear the individuals, including some of the leaders here that are on the panel, but also others that we have in the program, the private sector leaders, the ladies that we had in the prior panel, there's a lot of strength and positive changes that have been made. Param's story about how you achieve change in such a large scale in a heterogeneous country, I mean, really impressive. And I think those are the type of things that I think reinforce the economic data that we've seen. So where have my beliefs sort of changed a little bit, or where I feel I have learned something new? I was worried that India is moving in a situation, especially with the looming election, where it becomes all about celebrating the India growth story and how fantastic everything is going to be, how successful you are as individuals, how the country, how the country is going to be successful. I think the way that I've seen the discussion of the last 2 days was different. Yes, there was pride in what you've achieved and really a kind of positive view on what the future will look like. But there is no hesitation that I see to also think about what are the challenges that are ahead. There's no problem of criticism. You might not agree with the critics, but it's okay. They are part of the community. They can be in the room. And I think that is actually quite different from what I've seen in many other countries that were in kind of fast growth periods and that ultimately failed because they were unable to kind of see the dark side and see the changes. Now, the third point, I think, Richard, that's really very much in line with what you said. So I think how does India see itself in the world, and how do we as non-Indians see India? So you come from a history where I think with non-alignment you try to reduce the influence of others on you. You had a colonial power that told you what to do. That had to stop. Then there was a period, I think, where I see that India wanted to have the respect and the recognition of the world. It was all about how strong you are and how others recognize that. But I think you are inevitably, and I think Mike Enright pointed that out, I talked a little bit about that, you are going to be moving in a situation where you are the rule makers. The choices that you are making are going to define how the world looks like. And that's great power, it's also great responsibility. And I think if we can start that type of dialogue and some of the future conversation, I think that would be great. And I'd love to be at least listen as a non-Indian on how you deliberate those type of issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. And please mark your calendar for next year. We are making sure you're coming here again. Yes, but Paramji, so what are your insights? What do you think we possibly did not discuss? What more we should have seen? What are your takeaways?
Well, actually, I was just thinking, this is surprisingly, I'm coming here for the second time. So I came here many years ago when my daughter, Tara, was offered a tennis scholarship at Stanford. She became a professional tennis player. But in the end, family decision, we decided Duke was better because it was closer to DC. But it's been a fascinating visit for my wife, Indira, and myself to be here in the conference, to see the variety and the range of topics discussed. I thought that was fabulous, all the way from the economic story to, obviously, technology was running all the way through it. Fascinating to listen to the women entrepreneurs. And then we went into culture. So I think the entire range of sort of Indianness, if you like, was presented here. It was a very wide, I really like that. And I think in all that, the Indian story came out very clearly. also fascinating to see the passion. This is the first time we've really been to California, but to come to Silicon Valley, to come to Stanford, and to see the breadth and depth of talent here, and also the passion for India was fabulous. You don't see so much of this on the East Coast. It's a little more bland in Washington, D.C., and a little more vanilla, I would say. So I think here there's huge interest. And I think, as Christian mentioned also, to hear the two sides of the story. And I remember you telling me that, it's important to present opposing views, and I think it was very important to hear that. But I think finally, Amitabh has also been talking about it. In a couple of sectors, I think obviously the private sector has got a major role going forward, particularly for creating jobs. We didn't get so much into the MSME sector, and I think it'll be important to have a conversation, because they're the people who generate jobs. All those 6 lakh, how can we get them out of the 6 status? And there's a lot of momentum in India, but I think it would be an important discussion. The IFC and the World Bank as well, the International Finance Corporation, is increasingly going to focus on the MSME sector. So far, it's been all the big guys. But in health and education, and it was tremendous to hear how we can bring in the sort of non-profit sector, but also the for-profit sector. And I think going forward, there's got to be a much stronger partnership between the public sector and the private sector to really push up these two aspects of India, health and education, because human capital is really going to be critical for that next big push forward, whenever it happens, hopefully in the next 5 years, in the next government. So I think overall, in next year's conference, you've given us the dates. I think it'll be important then to focus a little bit on that part of the private sector and to see how technology, which is already being adapted, can help drive that change as well. And then finally, I think that, this is the moment. And I've always believed in that Latin saying, carpe diem, you've got to seize the day. And I think this is the time. And over the next 5 to 10 years, if there's a collaboration, we heard about the community of Indians in America. I think that connection between Indians here and Indians in India, I think that connection, that collaboration can really drive change, push the reform story forward. So hopefully we can seize the day and make that happen. But maybe, that's something we should take forward. We shouldn't wait for 1 year to discuss that. And I think in between, perhaps, we could have some more connections, even if it's virtual, which could build up to that 27th, 28th February of next year.
Oh, certainly, we'll do that. But we have some people in the audience. I'll open it up for questions. But Michael Enright, you've been the most diligent listener out here. Would you have any point as to what was your takeaway? You've been somebody who's really been studying India and things.
First off,
1 minute answer from your side.
As I told Sanjay earlier today, that I thought his talk actually raised more optimism in my mind for India going forward than any other discussion. Because, being used to doing strategy for countries and large organizations, a great strategy means nothing if you can't implement. And if you can get things done on the ground, then before long you can come up with the right strategy. So the implementation focus and that level of detail to me is quite encouraging. Again, the unanswered question, and Christian just alluded to it, was also the unasked question. And that is, what type of world does India want? And what type of world is going to allow India to take the place it wants to take in the world? And is India today operating on short-term interests that may actually result in a world that's shaped in a way that might work against India's medium and longer-term interests? These are the questions that I come away with.
Very nice. So anybody who'd like to say something on his point? No? Okay, fair. So anybody who has a question here? Asha, if you have a question, very quickly, please.
Yes, I have a question. Actually, more than a question, it's a comment. I just want all of us in this room, and especially all the senior people coming from India, and to think of ourselves as the founding team of this interesting thing that we are putting together. Richard is absolutely right that there is a community, there's a glimmer of community arising here. Everybody is hungry to see the US-India partnership grow. And we must commit, this room has to commit to being in this game through virtual meetings, Zoom calls, and so on, that you can set up, Amit, for every 3 months, something, so that we don't lose traction. There is enormous hunger even in Washington, D.C. for India moving faster. They are desperately seeking, and I've been very closely attached to D.C. now, and I want this happening. I want, I want you guys to be giving us, regular suggestions on what we should be doing even in Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Sure. And then just, we have to close. Siddharth, why don't you just have a quick, if you have a question, otherwise.
Yeah, just a quick question. Your wish list for Modi 3.0.
Okay, so that's a very interesting question. Wish list for Modi's next term. Like, that means we are quietly expecting that he's going to be the Prime Minister again, of course, and it looks very, very likely. So in one word, what do you think would be your wish list? Paramji.
I think, just taking the technology and AI into the sort of social sector on a much larger scale.
Very nice. And Ramesh?
Again, I think learning from experience, one area which has been discussed very less is India's achievement in infrastructure. I think today infrastructure of India really indicate as if India is preparing for 30 trillion economy. And secret is involvement of private sector in that. If we need to apply same thing to innovation, you call it technology, you call it R&D. In India, the R&D expenditure as percent of GDP is awfully low, 0.6%. Main reason for that is private sector participation in R&D is very, very small. So I think we need to create environment for private sector to make investment in R&D, to come with the patents, to come with the technology and innovation. So this is my wish for Modi 3.0, more involvement of private sector in development of technology and R&D.
Richard, you talked about India's place in the world. Now, how as an outsider, you would expect something that the Prime Minister should be looking at?
Unfortunately, I've got a new job for Amitabh. I think India should be the next member of the G7.
So, perfect. So like growth, and that's where the domination should happen. Awesome.
Yeah.
And possibly much more than that. What do you think?
Yeah, I might have a very odd comment. I'd say I would hope that he makes himself dispensable, that we don't, that there's no shock when Modi leaves. I think ensuring that the system is so stable that India is on a track that's not so reliant on that one leader at the top.
That's a very important point, because he's been a very charismatic leader who's been able to lead change. So create the second level or his people so that we're able to take it forward. Mr. Kant, the final word at the conference for you. What do you think you would expect or want Modi 3.0 to do?
I think making the eastern part of India grow. It's very critical that all these states, UP, Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, they must grow at double digits for the next decades. If they grow, India grows. That's as simple as that. And their growth means education, health, literacy, all of that.
Perfect. I think this is the most very kind of you. The next article that I'm going to write, or an opinion piece, is on this kind of a wish list that we are going to have. Thanks a lot for joining this conference. This has just been an exceptional experience. Thank you, Mr. Kant. Thank you, Mr. Iyer. Everybody for joining us. Thank you.